because questions from there. So welcome. If you're here, please leave a comment. It's nice to have you. This is a Ask Me Anything session. And so you are welcome to ask me questions. I should be able to see most of the questions right away from the system that I'm using. And I also have, I also have many questions that came in this week. So I'll be reading some of those questions. So my phone is down there and my camera's up here. So if you're watching me on Instagram, you may want to jump over because I can't look at both places at the same time. My eyes would be really weird. So so feel free, if you're watching on Instagram, to hop over. It's a little easier for me to see the questions on Facebook and YouTube than it is for me to see the questions on Instagram right now. Okay, so to get started here, I thought I would just talk about a bunch of the questions that came in this week. And then you are welcome to go ahead and put your questions in the comment box. And also, just leave a comment because it's nice to know that you're here and where you're coming in from. And if you're watching the replay, I'm sorry I can't answer your questions live, but hopefully if you're watching the replay, some of the questions that came in earlier will be helpful for you. And you are certainly welcome to post questions on the replay, and I will also respond to those questions. All right, so I'm rolling up my sleeves here to get to some of the questions that, some of the questions that came in this week. And there were some really good ones. Actually, I think I'll read you a couple of the really lovely comments that came in. And the first one really struck me. It was really beautiful. I think it came in yesterday. She said, "I'm not making this up. What you have taught me in these last 2 days is exactly what I need right now because my lower back started giving me trouble about 1.5 months ago. I kept thinking it would just be a temporary condition. It would go away in a few days." Have you heard that before? Right. I've thought that before about myself. But it didn't. Before I realized that 1.5 months had passed, I was getting worse and my range of motion was disappearing. And I was still telling myself, it's just temporary. You are just who and what I absolutely needed now, right now. After yesterday, my back and body instantly felt better and extremely relaxed. And today, even much better. I'm slow at it all, but I'm following through. Thank you. That's really very validating. And I'm very grateful for that comment. It was funny because I was telling one of my friends this morning, I woke up after the 5-day challenge that I'd been teaching. I woke up this morning and I was like, my back feels kind of good. It's like, I need to do that challenge every day too. Okay, Susan just read it and said, is it possible to view the videos from days I missed? Yes. If you look at the link that is in the description of this video right now, it should be in the description on Facebook as well as on YouTube. If you look at that description, there's a link, and that first link tells you where you can watch the videos. So you'll be able to watch the videos until April 22nd. You can watch them as many times as you want. And if you signed up for the challenge, we will be sending you the stick figures on Monday. So that's what I'm busy. I've got here you go. Oh, sorry, that's on my desk. Here you go. I've got my favorite pencil and my big eraser because this is what I use when I make stick figures of the classes that I teach. So I will be spending a lot of time at the kitchen table with my cat, scribing the stick figures. Oh, let me grab, I'll show you what they look like for those of you who don't know. They're like, I just taught a workshop. I just taught a workshop last weekend, 2 weekends ago. And so I stick figured all of the classes. I mean, yeah, all of them. We did 4 classes. And that's what the stick figures look like. So you'll see, like, this first one says rock and roll in circles. And then, then we did apanasana. Like, you start here and then you go to the exhale and you do that 6 times. And the exhale, that was some extra information there. The exhale equals 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 7. So, and they would know because they did the class. So if you did the class and then you get the stick figures, it's super easy to be like, oh yeah, I can, I remember what we did. And what's so wonderful, I think, about 20-minute classes is you only have like 6 or 7 postures to do. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, Susan wrote, is it still possible to, sorry, yay, thanks ever so much. You're welcome. And Deborah said, great, thanks. Okay, yes, you're very welcome. And I'm glad that the classes are helpful. And one of the things I just want to say about low back pain is that it is a ubiquitous problem. Many, many people struggle with low back pain and they don't know what to do about it. And then you'll sometimes hear people say, oh, you just have to build a strong core. My response to that is maybe, because that might not be the only issue. There can be many, many reasons. The etiology, which means the reason why people have these challenges, the etiology for back pain is actually very complex. And it's completely varied depending on who you are. Okay, yes, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. So feel free to ask questions. I have more questions to read from, of course. And hi everybody who's watching on Instagram. You're welcome to hop over to Facebook. Okay, so let's see. I want to read a couple more here, and I think I'm gonna pop this out so I can see better. Okay, that's better. Okay, so one more comment that came in that was really meaningful to me, that I want to make sure I read before I go to the questions is, your discussion about health promotion and the drug problem touched me deeply. My grandson died of a fentanyl overdose. I'm not going to read about the details about that for protecting the anonymity of the person. She said, I'm interested in anything I can do to help others. We had deep spiritual conversations before he went to rehab, and he died shortly after he got out. My heart goes out to you. My meditation and spiritual beliefs helped me work through this. Thank you. Thank you for writing that comment. And it really is, gosh, such a huge, huge issue. So many people have personal losses because of the fentanyl crisis, the opioid crisis, which is largely a fentanyl crisis. I'm not sure everybody understands that, but fentanyl is this synthetic, very, very cheap opioid substance that's often in legal medications, but it's also heavily laced into the illegal and the counterfeit medications that are out there. So like what's going on with the kids is they often share prescriptions, or they get their hands on these fake prescriptions. And then someone's like, oh, take this pill to sleep. Pills are just as popular amongst the young people and everyone, but particularly the young people, as are the sort of illicit substances from when I was a kid, whether that was marijuana or crank, street speed, and things that were around when I was a kid. Now pills are also much more on the scene, and many of them are laced with fentanyl. And fentanyl in the wrong dose will kill you very quickly. And so overdose deaths are up to 200,000 in the past year, which, just to put that in perspective, I think it was 3,000 people who died in 9/11. And we don't have the same kind of awareness, let alone rage and anger against what's going on with our youth in this country. And I think that's a tragedy and a crying shame. At any rate, that what does it point to? It points to chronic pain. Sure, back pain is part of it, but it also points to the pain of the soul, the pain that's in the heart, the pain that's deep in the culture. And you'll see the statistics coming out about suicide increases amongst young people, about the depression. And there's so much in the news about the depression among young girls, body image issues, all of that stuff. And all of that is feeding the pain, the chronic pain that people try to self-medicate with by gaining access to these illicit substances. So I really am very grateful for that comment. I'm very, just heartbroken for you. And I hope that people, I hope we can do things on a societal level to make shifts. And I also hope that individually, people can access some of the wisdom of the yoga practices to increase not only reduce the chronic pain, but also increase their spiritual assets, be able to leverage your spirituality. because that's what's called for right now. And I think I mentioned during the challenge, I had a conversation with one of the physicians who is at a very, very, very influential physician in the federal healthcare system. And he has worked with all of the top players and kind of is in the same category as Andrew Weil and Dean Ornish and those people. Anyway, last week I had the privilege of spending some time with him, and he said to me, the thing that yoga can help people with, and what you really need to be focusing on, is spirituality, because it helps people have access to their spirituality in a way that's non-sectarian, but it's also not secular. That's what one of my teachers, Gary Crafso, likes to say a lot. It's not sectarian, but it's not secular, right? It helps people to leverage their spirituality in a way that can support their health. And I think that's something that everybody needs right now. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so please feel free to put any questions that you have in the comments, and I'm going to keep reading from my list here. So here's a question that came in. Can you talk about and remind us about the importance of taking the time for ourselves? As a woman, too many times I see us getting ill because we have focused so much on others that on others that need our care, and we forget to make our self-care as a it says as a nice to have instead of a, oh, I see. We we forget, instead of thinking about self-care as a must, we think about it as a nice, which I think is that's a really interesting way to put it. Um, yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. And I think I'll talk about that in terms of my own experience, which was when I was a very young person, not that young. I was in my mid-20s, quite young. And I had started meditating regularly. And so I was at my parents' house. I'd come home after being in Asia and India for a long time. I went back to Asia actually after this particular time. So I must have been, I don't know, 26 or 27 at the time. And it was morning, and wasn't going to work. I was staying at my parents for a couple weeks, and I was meditating, and I had been doing that every morning since I got home. So I'd sit for, when I was young, I would sit for an hour, hour and a half, no problem. I sit less now because I'm busier, but back in the day, I used to sit a lot. And I remember my mom saying to me at one point, it seems to me that it's very selfish that you spend all that time meditating. And I remember being like, okay, mom, like, I'm sorry you feel that way. Like I didn't really go into it with her because I had spent plenty of years going into it with her when I was younger, and I knew it wasn't the right time to do that. So I said, okay, mom, I get that. And many years later, I watched the entire series of Mad Men on Netflix one summer. If you haven't watched Mad Men and you're about my age, if you are a Gen Xer and you haven't watched Mad Men, watch Mad Men. Even though it's weird, and it also is it's dark, and at the same time, it completely changed the way that I understood my mother and her generation of women, because they were acculturated in a very different way than my generation was. My generation was acculturated after that big, I guess, the second wave of feminism, right? And so to understand my mother better helped me to understand me better and understand that she was passing on values of her culture, which said that women were supposed to serve everyone else except themselves, and then it's very interesting because then I look at my son and his culture. He's 19, and women in that culture have a very different idea about self-care. I mean, it's very much prioritized and normalized, and it's not looked at like it's something bad or negative. So let's remember that self-care is a cultural thing as much as it is a personal thing. And then the next thing I would say about self-care is that if you can't get to the point of saying like, this is good for me and I'm good with taking care of myself, if you can't get to that point of saying I'm good and I accept taking care of myself, then take care of yourself for everybody else. Take care of yourself because it's good that you don't scream at your spouse. It's because you've taken care of yourself, you've had your needs met, you've taken care of yourself, right? It's good that you don't get, you don't blow up for no reason at your children. It's good that you don't have road rage. It's good that you can be more productive and more put yourself out there in a stronger way for your yoga students if you're a yoga teacher. So if you are not doing self-care for yourself, if you can't get to that place, then do self-care for somebody else. And that's a good trick. It's a way to trick that mind. But I do think eventually we have to get to the place where we understand that taking time for practices is not just about ourselves; it's about everybody else. And when we approach our practice that way, it also is really in alignment with the yamas and niyamas. It's very much in alignment with the yamas and niyamas because you're saying, like, I come to this practice with a sense of service, a service to others, the yamas, and service to myself. And if you look at brahmacharya, which means seeing everything as a manifestation of the divine, I don't use the sexual continence definition. I use a different definition that comes from the tradition. So seeing everything as a manifestation of the divine. I do my practice so I can see that. I do my practice so I can see the interconnectivity and the inner dependency of everything. I can see that better and feel less isolated, right? So that's one of the reasons I do my practice. And then in terms of the yamas, which are about your own self-regulation, I do my practices because that is Ishvara Pranidhana, the last of the niyamas. It means I take shelter in that cosmic consciousness, in the higher self, in the part of me that is very connected to everything, that understands the oneness in all things. So, if you can't do your practice for others, do it. I mean, for yourself, do it for others. And when you get to the place of understanding your practice as a manifestation of yamas and niyamas, then it becomes an ethical imperative as well. Self-care, I think, is an ethical imperative. That means this is acting ethically, is taking care of myself for all of those reasons. So thank you for the question. It's a lovely question, and I hope it's helpful. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. If you're here and you want to ask questions, go right ahead. And I am watching on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, you're welcome to hop over to Facebook or YouTube. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading questions from my list. And if you have anything, feel free to pop it in the chat. Okay, so the question was asked, which muscles are involved in lengthening the back? And I didn't get my screen ready for screen sharing, so I'm not going to show you a picture of that. But that's a really interesting question. Which muscles are involved in lengthening the back? So we know that, like, for example, the erector spinae, which are those ribbons of muscles that run down the length of the spine. Those are the primary muscles, you could say, that get lengthened, right? Those are the primary muscles that get lengthened when you are lengthening your back. And you can do that with things like forward bends. Forward bends don't only happen from seated and standing. I think that often gets a little bit misunderstood. We think of forward, and usually we call it a forward fold in the yoga world, which I tend to avoid that terminology because I do not fold like a piece of paper. I bend, and most people don't fold. Most people don't put their nose on their shins, right? So we bend more than we fold. Okay, so that being established, what muscles are involved in that? So the primary flexor muscle is the psoas, the iliopsoas, if you want to be a little more holistic, right? So the psoas is the primary flexor muscle. What's the psoas? It's a muscle that lifts your leg up, right? It's this muscle, lift the leg up, and it connects from the last thoracic vertebra, T12 and L1, all the way down, and it goes down a couple more vertebra in the lumbar, and then it connects down into your hip joint, and so it lifts you up. So that is that's a primary flexor muscle. There's other flexors, but that's the primary one. And so that flexor muscle is going to be involved in lengthening your back. So doesn't it make sense to have a strong, resilient psoas? Psoas is a very interesting muscle. it's not only, all muscles have endocrine function, which is fascinating. They help to regulate the hormone system, right? The neuroendocrine immune system. But the psoas is a particularly interesting muscle in that it goes into what's called flexor withdrawal. And that means it will go into a um, strong, almost intrinsic knee jerk reaction. I love that expression because it's exactly what the psoas does. Knee jerk reaction. When you feel something gets you, you have a knee jerk reaction because that's a fight or flight symptom, right? It's a response of the fight or flight system. So when you're in fight or flight, when you're in that sympathetic, something happened, and when it's really bad, we go into flexor withdrawal. And that means the knees go towards the face. And why? Because we're trying to protect the internal organs as well as the face from whatever threat is coming. So David Berceli did some interesting work. He's kind of a fascinating guy. He has traveled all over the world helping like war refugees to recover from their trauma. And just as an aside, I'm in the middle of reading a book called The Last Nomad, which is about the Somali war in the early 1990s, and a woman who escaped from Somalia. It's about Somalia in the 1990s. It's a fascinating story of war, clans fighting each other, what dictatorship does, and certainly post-colonialism. It's a fascinating book, but she talks a lot about her trauma from the war. So David Berceli has run around the world working with war orphans, and one of the things he noted is when he was in a bomb shelter, I think it was in Lebanon, and as the bombs were dropping, every time a bomb would hit, he noticed everybody in the room would go into this knee-jerk reaction, right? Knee towards the face. So the psoas is responsible for that. The psoas is intimately linked to the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the stress response in the system. And when your psoas is chronically contracted because of sympathetic nervous system overdrive, chronic pounding of the stress response, the trauma response, then guess what happens? Think about it. If your knees are close to your face all the time, and then you try to stand up, what's going to pay the price? Your low back, right? So this is one of the main etiologies that doesn't get talked about enough in terms of low back health. For example, there's research showing that I think it's 1 out of 2 women who've been sexually assaulted. It could be 1 out of 3, so don't quote me on that. It's a very high number, 33 to 50%, if I'm remembering the study correctly, have low back pain. And so the system goes into chronic overdrive. The knees are contracted towards the face. The psoas is contracted. And then you stand up, and then someone says, oh, just do this lunge and we'll stretch your psoas. Really, it's not the psoas that needs to stretch so much. The psoas needs to know via information coming top down and bottom up, meaning both from the prefrontal cortex and the executive function, as well the body having sensations of safety. The psoas needs to feel safe so that it can let go of its intrinsic holding patterning. That's what really, and this is what a holistic yogic approach to low back care is about, right? It's about taking the mental emotional piece into the equation as much as the biomechanical piece. So I hope that's helpful in thinking about, I got off on a little tangent there, and thinking about lengthening the muscles in the back. The psoas needs to be resilient. The psoas needs to be able to flex as well as release its flexion tension. And there's always a certain amount of tension in the psoas, no matter if you're sitting or standing. Like when you're sitting, the psoas muscle is contracted, but it's not really working that hard, And then when you're standing, the psoas has to be able to relax so that it's not pulling from the anterior part of those spinal processes and then causing tension in the back. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. Lonnie said, yes, Christine on the psoas feeling safe. It's so important. The psoas has to feel safe. The body has to feel safe because the psoas is going to feel safe when the body mind feels safe, when the whole system feels safe. Okay, so I'm going to keep going with questions here. And if you are watching, you are welcome to jump in. Just put your questions in the comments. Okay. So let's see. So I have another question here. It said, would you be willing to mention any postures to avoid if someone has osteoporosis or osteopenia? And there was another question. Let me make sure I get this one because it's about osteopenia. So the second part of that question came from somebody else. Oh, I wonder if you might comment on the 12 poses for osteoporosis, osteopenia from Dr. Fishman. I'm familiar with the study and the poses, but I have some concerns about the twist because of the severity of osteopenia of the lumbar spine. When I was first diagnosed, I was terrified, stopped yoga completely for a year. Now I've come to my senses. Okay, that's funny. So, okay, so let's talk about osteoporosis and osteopenia a little bit. So osteoporosis means bone loss. And a lot of people are talking about scleroporosis now too, which means muscle loss. And people are talking about that as being as significant as the osteoporosis, right? I'm looking down here because that's where my phone is. So if you're watching me on Instagram, feel free to hop over to Facebook or YouTube. Okay, so let's talk about it a little bit. Osteoporosis, so we lose bone, right? And osteopenia means you're going in that direction. It's diagnosed through something called a DEXA scan. Typically, you want to get your DEXA scans, particularly women. And if you're women like me that have I have the profile, like the light hair, and I kind of have weeny little bones. Like I don't have very big bones. Like yeah, that's an osteoporosis kind of profile. And I'm not too worried about it because I do lots of weightlifting and lots of yoga. And it's really important in my life to be active, but I still have the profile for it. It's still possible, There's things like smoking that make it more likely that you'll have osteoporosis, lack of activity, of course. There's a bunch of different things, digestive stuff, because it's not just like about dumping calcium into the system. Because if you have a bucket with a hole in it, like the calcium just comes out, right? So it's about how well you digest it. There's all these factors in it. So a lot of people are really interested in yoga for osteoporosis. It's become a big topic, I'd say, in the last 10 years or so. And Dr. Fishman has done a lot of great work at getting the information out there. And also he's done research. Okay, so here's my first point, which is what do you do? What can you do? What can't you do in yoga with osteoporosis? The first thing you need to do is talk to a healthcare professional. And you want to know specifically for your body what you can do and what you can't do. There are physical therapists who specialize in this. There are plenty of physicians who should know what to tell you. They might not. There's a lot of fear around it. So what happened, this might have been about 15 years ago or so, was that guidelines came out to tell people what movement was safe and what wasn't safe. And then people were like, I can never twist, I can't forward bend, this like fear started, and that was reflected. And we want to be really careful about that because fear mongering is never helpful, right? But I will say that because your diagnosis might be different, you might be losing bone from a place that somebody else isn't, that it's really important to have a healthcare professional give you guidance on this. I can't give you the guidance. Now, if you go there's national websites, like there's the Bone Foundation, I think it's called. I can never remember. But if you put in Osteoporosis Foundation, it'll come up. There's a few of them. There's like an international one. There's one in the United States. They have little guidelines to help people feel safer about good movement. But none of that is going to be particularly, I don't think it's particularly mind-blowing. It's just like, well, mostly keep your back straight and use your knees and your legs to lift stuff, which is what everybody says, because that's the same advice for low back disc issues. It's the same thing pretty much. Again, you want to make sure that you are talking to a healthcare professional so you know exactly what to do. There is, we do know just from regular old biomechanics that when you're sitting a lot, when you're sitting in a chair, that's when your spine is more at risk. So that kind of slumping sitting and not sitting with decent posture. But when you sit with decent, you could do it right now. When you sit up as opposed to slumping, you notice how you have many more muscles to use when you sit up. You're using core muscles and back, you're using your erectors and you're using all of the other back muscles, you're using everything for that posture. And your transverse abdominis is very important, right? So we know that having strong muscles is going to be supportive to the back, whether or not you have osteoporosis, osteopenia. So increasing muscle strength is going to be very important. And most of the things that increase muscle strength, particularly in the yoga system, are not the things that increase muscle strength are not the things that you necessarily have to worry about with fractures, because that's the biggest concern with osteoporosis is a fracture, right? Because fractures are typically things that happen from stretching, like forward bending and twisting, right? We think about those as more stretchy kind of yoga poses. But if you think about like what we did yesterday, we were lying on their back, like that stuff is just strengthening for core muscles and typically has much less risk. Lying on your back and then doing a big sit up, that can pose a risk for osteoporosis. I was trained in this stuff at Duke University many, many years ago. And and over the years, some of the guidelines have changed. So like people have rethought about what they're telling folks to do. And part of that is because you got to know what your situation is. If you don't know what your situation is, then, and you don't have a sign off from a medical person, then it's really hard to make those sweeping claims about whether or not something's going to help osteoporosis. Okay, so I hope that's helpful in thinking about, that, yeah, they're like when your spine's loaded, seated poses, twists, and forward bends, probably not so helpful. Work on more strengthening things, lots of standing poses, less forward flexion, less repetition. And you'll see, you can find these guidelines anywhere. They're all over the internet. They're not that hard to find. Okay, and then the second question was about Dr. Fishman's protocol. So I want to just offer all of my homage and respect to Dr. Fishman for doing the research and making a protocol. And the second thing I will say about that is I am not trained in Iyengar yoga. Iyengar yoga is, I've taken plenty of workshops on it, but Iyengar yoga is his wheelhouse. That's what he teaches. So if you want to do Iyengar yoga and you want to do yoga for osteoporosis with Iyengar yoga, I would do his stuff, The way I teach is very different. It's much more breath centric and less limb centric. So I work with central channel, the spine. I work with the spine and I work with the breath, but I'm all about the spine. That's the way I work. And the spine as well as the subtle body spine, right? So the chakras, like that's it. That's what my wheelhouse is. Iyengar is more arms and legs. So like you can think about it like if you want to work with your arms and legs, work with your arms and legs. If you want to work with your spine, then that's the stuff that I teach. And it comes from the Vinny yoga system, as well as my Gaudiya Tantra teachers from West Bengal, because a lot of the teachings that I received when I was a young person were from that area and very similar to, at least the asana part, very similar to Vinny yoga, and a little different philosophically. Okay, so I don't know. I mean, I hope that's helpful. And I have to be super careful because I'm not going to say never do a twist with osteoporosis or never do a forward bend. I'm going to say ask your doctor what they think about that for you. Okay, the next question is, by the way, if you're watching, welcome. It's nice to have you here. Leave a comment, even if you're not going to ask me a question. Just leave a comment because it's nice to know who's watching. Okay. The next question is about, relieving mid-back ache. How do I relieve the ache between my shoulder blades? I don't know because everybody has different aches between their shoulder blades. However, some postures that I've found that can be really helpful is making sure that you're activating those muscles between your shoulder blades. Let's just look at modern life. I spend a lot of time like this right here, like this on my computer, So I spend a lot of time in that more internal rotation of the arms on the computer, and, maybe not the best posture all the time. And many of us have this lifestyle, right? So many of us are dealing with weak, overstretched muscles, particularly from suboccipital, from right below your skull. And those muscles there, those erectors that start to ribbon down the back, right? And then we have weak rhomboids, because rhomboids do what? They do this. Makes me want to dance the Roger Rabbit, right? But that's what the rhomboids do. So when you take your elbows back, you get some of that action of the rhomboids. Also, the mid fibers of the trapezius are doing this too. So the trapezius muscle, the rhomboids, the erectors, the levator scapula, like those muscles are often weak and overstretched in modern humans. So anything that gets you to do Roger Rabbit a little bit more, which would be like Cobra, Locust, Warrior One, right? Roger, am I that old that I talk about the Roger Rabbit thing? I'm talking. Was it Rosie on Do the Right Thing who does that little dance? Anyway, those those postures any of those postures that we do in yoga, and there are lots of them that draw the shoulder blades back, are going to be helpful for building greater strength in the mid back. So I don't know why you have a sore mid back or an achy mid back, but those can be helpful. I also find with achy mid backs that restorative pose, well, any poses that stretch the pectoralis and the chest can be helpful. And then restorative poses like putting a bolster or a rolled up mat on the floor and lying down and doing these passive stretches. Also doing twist poses on the ground, so that when you're twisting one way, the muscles on the opposite arm are getting in opposite chest are getting some openness. That can be helpful because these muscles are going to do this contraction thing in this modern lifestyle, which overstretches that. So we want to give these muscles more space too. So I hope some of those tips are helpful in releasing mid-back aching. It's very common. It's very, very common. Okay. So yes, I'm going to keep reading questions. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. And I see some names that I know. I don't want to read them all out, but I know some of the folks that are here. So thank you for being here. Okay. So type in questions if you want. Next question is another one about osteoporosis. We already talked about that. I have mild scoliosis, and I would like to know if there are any modifications, considerations of what you will be presenting for those with scoliosis. Okay, so she is asking about my workshop that is coming up April 22nd. We start, and it's called The Neuroscience of Yoga for Low Back and Hip Health. So I'm not going to go too much into scoliosis in this workshop. It's already enough to I'm only having 4 hours for the lumbar, 4 hours for the sacroiliac joint, and 4 hours for the hip, which is just like nothing. We could do a whole week on each one. There's so much information. Nevertheless, I can tell you a couple of things about scoliosis right now is first, again, you got to get it checked out. What's off. Personally, I have scoliosis. I have a nice big C curve. It's very beautiful. And one of the things I noticed in my C curve, like if this was my spine, it's like this, right? So I'm a little more compressed this way. We don't know the etiology of scoliosis for the most part. Might be nutritional, might be genetic. We don't know. Some people say it's genetic, but that kind of, I'm a little crunched this way. So when I do extensions, and I'm overemphasizing it, one of the things I'll do when I'm doing an extension pose, like say, for example, Chakravakasana, which is tabletop, hands and knees back to child's, right? So one of the things I'll do, and I learned this from Gary, is that I'll shift my hands a little bit so that with my big C curve, if I create a little more space this way, and then I do a cobra, and I'm overemphasizing what I don't do this much. It's just a little bit, but I'm trying to show you. So my body's like this, right? So then if I shift like this just a little, and I start doing cobras from this direction, or locust from this direction, or chariot Vimanasana from this direction, which is kind of like cobra and locust, or I start to do Chakravarti asana from this direction. It's very interesting for me, usually just with the poses on the floor. It's very interesting to me how much more spacious I feel on this side. And then, you could do more lateral bends. I could do more lateral bends on this side than the other side, just for a little more balance. But I don't usually. I like symmetry in my practice. What I'll do instead is I might stay on this side a little bit longer. Like I'll do my repetitions and then I'll do some stay on the side a little bit longer, and that tends to work really well for me, because my scoliosis actually leads into SI challenges. So it really helps my SI when I'm just a little bit conscious of where the issue is. And I have to say, I did not know I had scoliosis for a long time. And then I got an x-ray probably in 2001. I think I got an x-ray and I was like, whoa, that's scoliosis. I had no idea. And then I had to spend a lot of time interocepting into it. Like now I'm just like, oh yeah, I totally know where my scoliosis is. But it took me years to get to the place where I was like, I could feel it. And I noticed where the compensation was and where the compression was. So that's another thing that slow mindful yoga is so helpful for people with. And I'm biased, but I much prefer it to like really intense alignment based practices, because it gives you the opportunity to start to be the scientist with your own body as the experiment, and be like, that's what I feel when I do that thing. That's interesting. What else did I notice there? That's interesting. I'm a huge fan of Feldenkrais, and Feldenkrais has so much in common with this way of approaching asanas as well. Okay, so good. I'm glad you're here. Let's see. Deborah asked a question. What is best for sciatic pain? Okay, so again, Deborah asked, what is scoliosis? Sorry, scoliosis is when there's a curvature of your spine. It's typically a C curve, and some people it's an S curve. So your spine's not straight. It somehow curves a bit. So what's the best practice for sciatica pain? Of course, what it depends on is, what is your sciatic pain? What is it causing it? I don't know. So it's hard to know what the best pose is for sciatic pain. I will say that some people find relief from poses like Vashisthasana, which is a half plank. And we did some of that yesterday. And I did it in a version where you're just kind of lifting the hips up and down. I didn't do it in a stay really long version, because it's more accessible, especially if you've got stuff going on in your shoulders or lack of upper body strength. Or I shouldn't say lack, or less upper body strength, because you might have plenty of upper body strength, but it might not be enough to hold your hips up, right? So that seems to be one pose that a lot of people will use for sciatic pain. But sciatica, again, just like everything else, has to be diagnosed, and you have to understand the etiology. You have to know, where is it coming from? What is compressed? What movements would be good for it? Like, work with a physical therapist or a yoga therapist who can really help you identify and then give you poses that are going to be useful for you. Okay, so let's see. Bijan came in from Edinburgh, sorry, and diagnosed with osteoporosis. I seem to be okay with most asanas. I think this is because I'm of a Kapha Pitta constitution. I love that. Thank you. The Western medical system doesn't accept this model. How can we make the links between the systems? Oh my gosh, that's that'll take me a week to unpack. And years and years to work on. I mean, this is the stuff I spent the whole day yesterday. It was a 6-hour meeting with the Integrative Health Policy Consortium, and this is stuff that we talk about all the time. Like, how do we change the paradigms? I will say that there are many, many good people working to change the paradigms, and that makes me feel really good. And the second part of that I'll say is that the public wants the paradigms to change. The public is so invested in complementary and integrative medicine. And complementary and integrative health, I'll say. And the third thing I want to say about that is, we don't know what other forces are at work here, whether it's the forces of the stars, the forces of the gods and the goddesses. Like, we don't know what other forces are at work in terms of making the world a different place. And those paradigms will shift, and we all can work together to make that happen. And we have to, in whatever way. If you're working on the level of just like, I work with my students to help them understand that they have more control over their health, fantastic. And if you're working with local governments or hospital systems, or you're working with the state government, or you want to work on the federal level like I'm doing, like, any way that you do it is good, and all of it is going to contribute to this, to the all of it is going to contribute to the paradigm shift. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And just to go back to your Pitta Kappa constitution, absolutely that makes a difference whether or not you are going to be dealing with the fallout of osteoporosis, and like being paralyzed not to move is not the way to go. We have to move, we have to build strength, we have to do it safely, and we need to get rid of that medical fear that doesn't necessarily serve anyone, right? Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, and then Rhonda said, as a yoga teacher for 50 years, woohoo, you're awesome. I can attest to this connection between yoga and the nervous system, trauma, personal history. The old idea that poses alone are the answer is an old idea. That's right. Before the recognition of this connection, I discovered it simply from my own experience and awareness. That's beautiful. It's beautiful to see the control all people can have over their physical, mental, and emotional health. Thank you. That's wonderful, Rhonda. I really, really appreciate your comment. Okay, so here's my next question. You're welcome to type in the comments if you're watching. Okay, the next one is my sacroiliac joint. What to do and what not to do when it's aggravated, and how to stabilize balance. Thank you very much for that question. That is a terrific question, and one that I wish every yoga teacher would address, or I think first get trained in and then address, because it's huge. I went to an SI joint workshop once 20 years ago, and it was like all the things to do if you want to give yourself sacroiliac joint dysfunction, basically. Like, now in retrospect, I was like, what was that person thinking? Because there are so many things we do in yoga. Like, let's take, for example, pigeon, or so even supine pigeon, but pigeon itself, and then the pigeon where you're like forward bending or up in pigeon. Like, pigeon pose can be good for some people because it does give you a little more accessibility to the piriformis and the external hip rotators. That's good. But for some people, that's just like a meal ticket to SI pain, because of it's just pulling that SI joint. It's not necessarily the right pose for everybody. And it, just like everything, I feel like I'm always like, I feel like I'm always banging the drum in the yoga world, like, stop doing nonsense. Because particularly for the hypermobile people, the SI joint, like, let's remember, it's largely connected by ligaments. And once you overstretch those ligaments, you are really in trouble. I had to control the New Jersey that was about to come out there. So you're in trouble. And that means you're going to have to really, really work hard on building strength. So I can't tell you exactly what to do for your SI joint, just like everything else, but I can tell you a couple of principles. The first one is symmetry. You want to do symmetrical stuff, not asymmetrical stuff. So that, like, a lot of wide-legged stuff, like if you're going to do a wide-legged thing, it should be like maybe a forward bend, or maybe a wide-legged down dog. But you want to lay off the asymmetrical big warrior twos and big side angle poses, and even big warrior ones. Like, lay off that stuff. If you're going to do asymmetrical, bring your feet in closer, keep it tight, keep that stuff supported. That's the first thing. And then symmetry, symmetry, symmetry. So if you're going to do forward bends, that's fine. If you're going to do extensions from your stomach, fantastic. And then the second big principle of SI stuff is build strength. So, feet flat, on your back, lift your hips up, and do it a lot. And we'll be going over many, many variations of all of that in the upcoming training, because I have 4 hours that are just on the SI joint. So I'd love you to join me for that. Big problem in the yoga world. So many people have SI problems. Okay, so let me see if there are some more questions coming in. Here's one from Lee. I was observing a yoga therapy session where the breathing practice was called conscious breathing, but it seemed to be the same as structural breathing. Have you heard those names used interchangeably? No, I have not, but people, I mean, I do it too. Sometimes I'll be like, let's do flying squirrel, and it's really Vimanasana, but I like to call it flying squirrel. Like, so sometimes I use my own names too, but I usually tell people where it came from. So structural breathing, as far as I know, comes from Desikachar. He learned it from Krishnamacharya. And structural breathing is a really, really powerful way to support your low back and your SI and your hips, to support all of those structures in asana practice. And I think I have mentioned it sometime this week. I think we worked on that in the second video this week, but it's my thing. I use it all the time. And by the way, I learned structural breathing the first time in 2003. I think that was when I first started using it, and I hated it. I was like, what are you talking about? I've been belly breathing for at that point, I'd been belly breathing for 15 years or something. I was like, this is awful. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm going to keep trying. And as I started to get it, I started to understand it better. And I think part of the reason I didn't like it at first is because I'm naturally more of a hyped up, higher energy, hyper arousal energy is kind of my thing. That's why I love yoga, because it helps me to bring the nervous system down. But anyway, I think structural breath, like, you have to spend time to get it. You have to keep doing it. Not everybody gets it right out of the gate. I can't tell you how many people I work with that take years to really understand it. So thank you for the question. And no, I've never heard it called conscious breathing before, but who knows? Maybe somebody else calls it that. I mean, maybe it came from somebody who studied with Desikachar and he told them it was called conscious breathing. I don't know. I can't make that judgment, but I've only heard it called structural breath from my teachers who I've studied with several teachers in Desikachar's lineage, but my main teacher is Gary Krafsa. Okay. Hi, Ashley. How are you? And I see that your question is, I agree that deep, full expression isn't helpful for some people and that their own personal variation of the pose can be more beneficial. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I really try and avoid terminology like the full expression of the pose, because I don't even know what that means. Everybody has different arm to torso ratios, different leg to torso ratios. Everyone is going to look different. People have different lordosis in their lower back that may not be pathologic. I remember one time I worked with this woman that had such a big lordosis in her low back, and she was like, every time people are always telling me to tuck my tailbone, it just hurts my back. Like, this way my back is. So, and by the way, that Kardashian style is rather popular at the moment. I mean, it's like, who cares what your butt looks like? I care about whether or not you're comfortable and functional in the pose. So functionality always trumps form in my iteration of asana, which doesn't mean posture is not important. Of course it is. But, another example, I worked with somebody who had hip dysplasia. So her feet naturally turned in. There was an internal rotation. And then she would go to yoga and the teacher would say, mountain pose, put your feet straight. And they would tell her, no, your feet are, no, you have to put your, and she was like, I have hip dysplasia. That hurts. She was born with hip dysplasia. So, if we really want to be for all people and not just give lip service to accessibility, then we have to start looking at functionality in poses and stop obsessing about what they look like. It's just not that helpful for anyone. And not only to mention, it's not only helpful, it can also be harmful for some people, which is why I think some people do Iyengar yoga because their bodies, it works for them. Like, I'm never going to say to someone, don't, if you like Iyengar yoga, go for it because it works for that particular kind of body. One time I heard Paul Greeley talking and he was like, there's basically two kind of people in the world. You're either internally rotated in your femurs and then you're runners, or you're externally rotated and then you're dancers. And I was like, so what do Iyengar people? What are Iyengar people? And he said they're internally rotated. I was like, maybe, I don't know. That's interesting. He said Iyengar was internally rotated, but Iyengar was also extremely mobile. I mean, if you look on light on yoga, it's just like, oh my God, the stuff that he could do was shocking. So, I mean, mobility is going to have to do, of course, with genetics and your joints, but also, do you have a lot of fascial adhesions? Have you been moving your body in all the different ways that it needs to move? There's 6 movements of the spine. Do you do that regularly? Those are important questions. So there's genetic components, there's use components, like the woman who, I'm sure you've seen these videos of the woman who doesn't have any arms, but she like pumps the gas with her feet. She was born without arms. She like pump gas with her feet and she can drive with her feet and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, that just hurts to look at, having your feet up by your ears like that. But that's use dependence. And there may be some genetic component as well. So I think it's fascinating. The human body can do just about anything. At this point in my life and in my teaching as a teacher in my late 50s, postmenopausal, really working with lots of baby boomers, lots of Gen Xers, my teaching is about functionality. Like, I just want you to be able to play with children and grandchildren, play with your dog, do your gardening, go for long walks. Like, I want people to feel happy and healthy and like really solid in their bodies. So that's what I focus on. Like, I don't focus on getting your foot to your ear. I don't work with a lot of people that don't have arms, or I don't work with a lot of people who are gymnasts and really they have to do that because that's part of their profession, or Cirque du Soleil people. Like, if that's who you are, that you got to find a yoga teacher who does that. So, and that's one of the beautiful things about yoga is there's something for everybody. I do work with lots of injured ex-acrobats, yoga teachers, and dancers, and I have forever. Like, I've just always been in that space, Okay, anyway, I hope this is helpful. Rhonda asked me to demonstrate structural breath. So structural breath is when you inhale and the breath comes here, the ribs lift up out of the hips, the belly stays firm till the end of the inhale where it releases, and then the exhale comes from the lower belly and moves up. Now that is my 30-second, that was less than 30-second explanation. If you want to go deeper, please go to YouTube. Go to my channel on YouTube, Subtle Yoga, put in structural breath. You'll get a couple of videos there with me demonstrating structural breath. So I hope that's helpful. We're just about at the end of the hour. I can't believe it. Okay, I want to make sure I get through. Someone asked me about Dr. Sarno. Dr. Sarno. I have such a warm place in my heart for Dr. Sarno. He's been around forever. I don't know, not a lot of evidence base for Dr. Sarno, but lots of anecdotal evidence. People just love him. He talks about how low back pain is due to rage and unprocessed emotional issues, and that this, causes all this tension and lack of blood flow and metabolite accumulation in the low back. So Dr. Sarno did a lot of good for a lot of people, and that's about all I can say about it because I haven't really seen any evidence, and I haven't practiced his stuff. Okay, and here's a good one. How do I honor my back while practicing yoga? Yeah, honor your back while practice. I love that. Honor it. The way you honor it is you slow down and do less and do you can do more if you want to. Slow down. And you don't have to feel like you are overexerting. That's one of the things I want to say. I think anaerobic exercise where you're doing weightlifting and stuff, I'm into it. I love it, but that's not what I do with yoga. My yoga practice is about teaching my nervous system that it can let go. I can let go of intrinsic tension. I can let go of whatever's on my mind. I can let go so that I can connect to my higher self. That's what yoga is about. for me. And that's how I teach it. So honor your back in your yoga practice by being there, being present, and listening and having a relationship with your body instead of trying to dominate it. And one of my little soapbox things is that we've lived in this world of domination for so many centuries. Sorry about that. We've lived in this world of domination for so many centuries, and that domination extended, especially from the Western world, it extended to other countries, it extended to animals, it extended to the natural world, and it certainly extended to women. And so then we're having this idea that we have to dominate the body. Like, that's such a common theme that you see in the fitness world. I don't like that theme. Like, I want to be friends with my body. I want to dominate it, or oppress it, or the words that they use, boot camp. Like, really? It's so much is that master slave kind of dialogue. And that's not how I want to treat my body. I want my body to be free, because I want my mind to be free. And so, yeah, there is an appropriate time to use strong exercise. Don't get me wrong. I'm all about it. But there's also a very appropriate time for listening and communicating. And that is what distinguishes yoga asana practice from all the other fitness stuff out there, in my opinion. Okay, let's see. Somebody wrote, I am a yoga teacher and I've adopted the slow flow mindset around yoga, so I avoid most things that aggravate it. Some tips and pointers would be fabulous. Oh, the tips and pointers are about, the SI joint. Sorry, I read that in the middle. Okay, so we already talked about SI. We talked about the 12 poses. Here's another one. When you're rocking in circles, what is the spine doing? Okay, so this is when you're lying on your back and making circles. What are you doing? So when you're lying on your back making circles, that is basically about massaging the SI joint, which it can really love to have some massage. So that's why I try and send these neuromuscular signals from the SI joint, from the hips, from the low back to the brain that say easeful, quiet, peaceful, good. All those feelings. Good feelings, peaceful, comfortable feelings. That's such an important neuromuscular piece that I think gets missed so much in the yoga world. It's like, if you don't have to do the biggest pose, if you're feeling pain in your shoulder or pain in your low back, but if you're sending these good, positive feelings to your brain is going to respond by turning down the nociception, the pain signaling. Is going to turn that stuff down. So it's a really good idea to send kind messages to from your body to your brain. And yeah, again, like, you can do things that are harder. You can do, you can do your workout stuff, but this is what distinguishes the slow mindful yoga practice, is that we can use it as a way to let the brain see that there's other ways of being in the body than the chronic discomfort or pain that it often gets into. So that's what we're doing when we're rocking. Let's see. And then somebody asked me about osteoarthritis. Let's see. Are there implications or concerns for those of us working with participants in our classes? Absolutely. And that's kind of what I was just talking about with osteoarthritis. So arthritis is a inflammatory condition, of course. So you're sending inflammatory signals, or the immune system rather is producing inflammatory signals, right? Inflammation then kicks in that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis response, and you're back into the stress mode, and it all is a negative feedback loop, right? So yes, what do we need to think about with osteoarthritis? We need to think about less pain, send signals of easeful, mindful, right? It's like, you could do a huge arm circle, or you could do a small shoulder circle that's easeful and feels good and sends different messages. So of course arthritis is a very complicated, not only etiology, meaning where it comes from, but also treatment, because you need to address what's going on in the bones. You need to address physiologic stuff. can have to do with inflammation in the system, perhaps over acidity, perhaps it has to do uh, with what was I going to say? The over acidity. Sorry, I got stuck there. But having to do with inflammation in the body. It could have to do with diet, right? And then you want to shift that the messages that are coming up into the body. We can't just entirely do that with yoga, but yoga lifestyle and Ayurveda would be a different conversation. But in terms of like your yoga classes with osteoarthritis, you want to do less, and you want to let people feel good feelings more. Also with arthritis, like the osteum, the periosteum that covers the bone, that often really responds well to massage, whereas the joint doesn't. So a little bit of like kind self-massage into the periosteum can be really helpful. And that could be the case in, working with your humerus, for example, getting back there, working with the humerus and sending kind signals from the periosteum when the joint is inflamed. And then there's all this interesting stuff about cold therapy and stuff out there that you can look into, but I'm not going to go into that here when we're talking about asanas. I think that's the last question. Did I miss any? If you want to put some questions in the chat, you are welcome to. What's the best way to find a good functional medicine practitioner locally? Oh my goodness. I would go to the, what's the name? Oh gosh, what is it? America. I don't know if you're in America, but it's the American Functional Medicine Practitioners, I think they're called, association, and they probably have a list. Just look up, see if you can get the functional medicine people online to find a good functional medicine practitioner, because there's many people practicing what's called functional medicine, but they're not certified through the functional medicine people. So you want to be really mindful that you're not going to anybody who advertises that they do functional medicine. They may or may not be doing it. And I know that from my dear friend, Amy Mack, who is just, I love her. She's the executive director of that functional medicine organization. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to say today. Let's see. Somebody wrote, I use small exercise balls and tennis balls to massage the upper back and low back. Oh, that's great. I love that. Slow, gentle movement really works with massage, tension release. Yeah, I love the balls too. And I started teaching self-massage many years ago, just with hands. And I think hands have a healing energy that's different than what you get from a tennis ball, even though I love that stuff. But I think it's also good to experiment with massage with your hands, which, by the way, we'll be doing some of that in the workshop. So I hope you take a look at the links to the workshop. If you think about signing up and joining us, the early bird special ends on Sunday. It ends tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. So I would love you to join me for it. If you need a scholarship, just let us know. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to end now because we've gone a little overtime. It's really nice to see you all. Take good care. And join me on Wednesdays. I do live streams on Wednesdays. Live streams on Wednesdays right here on Facebook and YouTube. Okay. Take care. Bye.